Thank you for coming out on a really disgusting night. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, seriously. I'm super, super, super happy to see all of you. It's just, I'm so grateful that you made the trek out here. Back in grammar school, they taught us all about crocodiles and what to do if you ever meet one. Don't try to run, because you're on their territory, and they can ensnare you in one of their long tentacles before you take your first stride. Plus, they can clear vast distances with their powerful hind legs, each one the size of an adult human, and their strong forelegs can climb any surface and dig through almost any barrier. You might be able to hide because we don't know how they sense their prey, since they can't rely on vision or hearing in this pitch dark wind that they live in. They may use scent, or maybe they can detect motion somehow. Nobody's ever hidden from one, but you might be the first. The only viable strategy, though, is to attack. Crocodiles do have a few weaknesses that humans can exploit. They have soft spots on the underbelly where the carapace doesn't extend all the way around. I know where all of their major organs are because I watched Frank the Butcher carve one up for some fancy banquet after a few hunters had gotten lucky, returning from the night in one piece and with fresh game. But their main weakness, the easiest one to reach, is the exact center of the pincer that's right in front of me right now, sticking out of the creature's head. The impenetrable shell contains 2 knife-sharp claws, but at their midpoint is a forest of 100 wriggling tongues, each one about the size of your little finger. If you manage to strike at the exact heart of the pincer and hit those slimy appendages, then you might kill it in one stroke. That pincer is so close, I can feel one of its edges scrape against my throat. It could slice my head off before I could even react. I try to summon all of my courage, brace my feet on the slippery ground to deliver one great blow to the warm spot at the pincer's fulcrum. I can do this. I'm strong enough. I raise both fists. Then I stop. Because I feel warm breath coming from below the pincer where the creature's mouth is, and that part of me that always stands back and pulls everything apart instead of just blurting out words all the time is asking, why is a crocodile's mouth so far away from all those tongues anyway? She can't possibly use them to taste anything or make any sounds. Why are they right at the center of this armored scissor, vulnerable yet shielded? I lower my fists. Instead, I push my unprotected face forward, almost losing my balance in the dark. The pincer is all around my head and neck now, but it doesn't close and kill me. Instead, this crocodile lets me press forward and push my frost-burnt nose into the moist heat of her slimy, warm grubs. They brush my face, and my head floods with urgent smells and disorienting sounds, a beautiful ugliness, too much to handle, like I'm out of my head drunk with no up or down, nothing but a whirl of sensory overload. I almost keel over, but somehow I stay upright until I'm somewhere else. I'm way out in the middle of the night now, surrounded by huge sheets of ice on all sides. A mountain of ice and snow sidles past along the horizon. We are thousands of kilometers farther out than any human has gone in 25 generations since we lost all of our scout ships and our all-terrain vehicles. Somehow, I can see in the dark now, except I realize I'm not seeing at all. I'm using alien senses, and my mind is turning them into sight and sound. I tear through the landscape so fast the wind can't keep up. A sudden storm could rip me apart. The tundra could swallow me, but I don't even care. My back legs push against the ground, and the ice surrenders while my smaller front legs rip into the slick surface, propelling me faster and keeping my balance. I'm not running. This is something much better. I've never felt so much power in my body, and so many sensations flood into the ends of my 2 great tentacles as they taste the wind around around me. I want to laugh. And then I turn and see that 4 other crocodiles are running alongside me, grasping some spiky devices in their tentacles and guiding a sled full of some kind of precious metal. I feel a surge of pride, safety, happiness that they're with me and we're going home. Then we reach it, a huge structure in the shape of a rose with all of its petals spread, a circle surrounded by elaborate crisscrossing arch shapes. Only the very top pokes above the surface, and the rest extends far below the ice, but still, its beauty almost stops my heart. A glimmering city in the middle of the night, many times larger than my hometown of Siosvant, that no human eyes have ever seen. I must have blacked out because I wake up and find that the crocodile has swept me up in her tentacles and she is using her front legs to brace me while also climbing the sheer rock face that I fell down. I'm still frozen to the bone, but she has wrapped some kind of thick blanket around me that feels like something between moss and fungus. The fabric feels warm and dry, wound around my face with just enough slack to let me breathe. One tentacle covers my nose and her cilia brush against my skin. I still can't see anything, but I feel our rise in my inner ear, and even with the crocodile's body shielding me, I feel the bitter wind flowing around me. The crocodile deposits me at the same spot where the 2 police officers pushed me over the edge into the night. I'm on the ground before I even realize that she's laid me down, and I wriggle out of her covering only to be blinded by the faint light for a moment. The cops are long gone. My rescuer is even bigger than the other crocodile I saw being butchered as a child, with a thick carapace and weathered skin on her legs and tentacles. There are 2 large indentations, one on either side of her head, which look like big, sad eyes, but aren't. Her round shell hunches as she shields herself from the sudden exposure to partial sunlight, which no crocodile can ever endure. Her pincer opens and closes as if she's saying goodbye. Before I can even take a proper look or try to communicate again or do anything really, the crocodile has turned around, already disappearing back down the mountain into the night. So I'm going to skip ahead and read a little bit from the end of the book, which it's not a spoiler, don't worry, but it's the same crocodile or same creature. They're actually called the Gelets. And we're revisiting that same scene that I just read to you from. Rose, who is that creature that we just heard from, keeps reminding me of when I used to visit her. She showed me how I looked that first time she met me out on the ice, wearing my secondhand trendy clothes, dying, terrified. She showed me that memory before, but this time I can identify more easily with Rose's perspective. I'm Rose, and I see this human shivering from cold and terrified rage, and she does that animal thing of tensing to fight or to run. But instead, she does something that no human has ever willingly done before. Tilt her head back, let my tendrils touch her bare flesh. I can feel Rose's surprise, her euphoria, the sense that something perverted and maybe wonderful is happening here. When I came to the city in the middle of the night, Rose stayed away because she needed this to work so much. She was worried she would overwhelm me. But she shared everyone else's impression of me, and she helped to share the consensus that it was time for me to come home. I try to ask Rose the question that's been bothering me since I came to the city in the middle of the night. What do the Gelets, what do these creatures believe in? I have to ask several times, and then she seems to get it because she shares with me an ancient memory, the oldest that anyone has ever shown me. Or maybe not a memory, maybe a legend, or a little of both. I can tell its age by the smooth edges, the lack of sensory detail, and the easy flow of events. The same way that humans can spot that a story has been told and retold by a long chain of people because it makes too much sense. Long ago, before the first civilization ever rose and fell on this planet, everyone lived in scattered burrows all over the night, with no more than 100 people per burrow. They wove their tendrils together when anybody wanted to share information about what she had seen or what she had done, or somebody might come up with a simple idea that she shared with everyone else, like a way to harvest more roots and grubs to feed into the web where their children were developing, or how to strengthen their barriers against ice slides and avalanches. And that's when their greatest love story took place. These two different people who had grown up in different burrows came together after some brutal ice storms had driven them away from their homes. The two refugees became inseparable, and their tendrils were intertwined whenever they weren't working or eating. They slept with their pincers wrapped around each other in their own mossy nook where the cool air ran over their carapaces. Their dreams flowed back and forth between them, and their memories of having to flee their homes blended together until they almost shared the same past. Everyone else recoiled because this couldn't be healthy for them. Plus, they were excluding the rest of the community, which was hurtful. People tried to pry the two of them apart physically, or sent one or the other of them off on a long errand outside the burrow. At last, the oldest and most patient of the burrow's residents decided to talk to both of them together and find out exactly what perversion they had been drawn into. And then there were three of them. Entangled, inextricable. People began talking about evicting all three of them. What had seduced them into this unnatural closeness? A set of designs for a water wheel, using the nearby underground river to operate a crude mill that would help them separate out the poisonous part of some mushrooms that grew in the caves. This was such a complex idea that one person could not invent it alone and then share it with everyone else. The concept needed to be shaped among two or more people working together. They couldn't even share it with the others until they had the concept. And these lovers had discovered a powerful thrill, a joy that went all the way down to their stomachs in weaving a big idea together. Like some wild rapture, the sensation of helping others to imagine something bigger than yourself. Somehow, this weird love story is the foundation of this community's politics, or maybe religion. Rose lingers on the oddest parts, like when they finally reveal their invention to the rest of the community, or the tenderness when the couple becomes a trio. I sense the echoes from all the countless other times that people have passed this legend around, and the lesson that comes with it. To join with others to shape a future is the holiest act. This is hard work, and it never stops being hard, but this collective dreaming / designing is the only way that we get to keep surviving. And this practice defines us as a community. Even the other communities that live apart from the Midnight City, scattered all over the night in smaller cities or towns, share this same origin story. Cool. Yeah. Thanks. So do you want me to read a tiny bit more and then do some Q&As? Or, yeah? Okay. So I'm going to read a little bit about Sophie and Bianca. This is a party scene. It's a little bit more fun. So Sophie is the narrator we just heard from, and Bianca is her best friend. I can't even move in this ball gown. If I lift my arms more than halfway, I feel the seams strain. Even though red taffeta, tulle, lace, and ribbons have nothing in common with the gloved hands of the Shiasfanti police, I still have a suffocating threat reaction to these restraints. But I close my eyes and I give myself patience. And then I breathe and I smile because Bianca's looking at me, beaming and clapping her hands. People will lose their minds when they see you. Bianca can't stop giggling and twirling in her dress, making her skirt billow. Bianca is wearing another kind of fragrant oil with hints of cinnamon and marigold, and her face glows thanks to the bright lines around her eyes and the faint contours accentuating her perfect face bones. Bianca leads me past the pit, and we get on a train inside a pneumatic tube which rushes us to the southernmost part of town. Soon, we're in a vast granite courtyard, ringed with a spiked iron fence, facing a 10-garreted mansion made of bricks so white they sting my eyes. We introduce ourselves to a man in a dark purple suit who checks some list for our names. I can't stop staring at the layers of crimson satin across Bianca's shoulders and the delicacy of her every movement. The man in purple leads us to a giant space full of marble floors that reflect the overhead light in bold streaks, walls made of some dark wood that I don't even know the name for, and billowing drapes of velvet. All of the men are wearing collages of different colored fabric strips that create an effect like a million shards of tinted glass, while the women wear costumes that make the red gown I'm wearing look plain. Feathers, glowing threads, tight corsets, shimmering strands of beads. Somebody hands me a drink, and it has the same effect on my taste buds as all these colors on my eyes. I realize that the room is divided into 3 groups, and each group wears the same insignia as jewelry or as a badge to mark which family they belong to. The next thing I know, Bianca has a small crowd around her, and she's telling them how she got here in a melodramatic style, like something from a storybook. Men and women in purple costumes walk past, offering piles of food and more goblets of expensive liquor, and I can't help taking some. And then the most beautiful man I have ever seen strides up to me just as my mouth is full of food. And I chew as fast as I can while he asks my name and says that Chiasfont must be a desolate wasteland with its 2 brightest lights gone. I'm still chewing, and the man keeps asking questions. This food is delicious, but it takes an entire lifetime to reduce to something that I can swallow. And even after I swallow the food, I can still only stare at this gorgeous person with his wide face, limpid brown eyes, and square jaw. Forgive my rudeness. My name is Dash. He gestures around. This is my house. Bianca notices that I'm stuck, and she comes to my side. I'm Bianca. Thank you for your hospitality. This is the coolest party I have ever been to. Well, you are the best thing that could possibly have happened to my party. Dash kisses her hand like a prince in an old storybook. You'll have to forgive Sophie, Bianca says with a stage wave. She's been through a lot. It's a terrible story. She was wrongly accused of a crime and torn away from us by the Chiasfonti police, who paraded her through the street and humiliated her in front of the whole town. And then they drove her to the mountainside and forced her to climb in, go into the night. She nearly died. She was cast out of society. It was really terrible. I stare at Bianca, and even though the food is gone, I still have trouble swallowing. Afterward, when we step off the train near the pit, Bianca can't stop laughing and flouncing in her dress. That was the biggest rush of my entire life. I forgot how good it feels to just sweep into a giant room full of immaculate people and just dominate all of their attention. This is what I was made for. I haven't been this happy since... Bianca stops talking because she notices an expression on my face that she has never seen before. What's wrong? Are you angry with me? What did I... Don't ever do that again, I spit. She starts to ask and I cut her off. Don't turn my real life suffering into a cute story to entertain those people with. Bianca starts to explain, to justify herself, and I give her a look that makes her stop talking. Just don't, I spit. Never again. I don't even understand why you care so much about what some stupid rich people think about us. You can tell them whatever you want about what happened to you, but you don't get to turn my execution into party banter. My breathing sounds like a giant rusted machine. What I went through after they took me away and sent me into the night, it still hurts. I have to work so hard. You have no idea. Even I sometimes forget how hard I have to work just to stay at peace with it. Okay, I'm sorry, Bianca pauses. She swings her puffy arms, almost hitting the gray brick wall. But you know what happened to me too? I watched the police take you away and I blamed yourself, and I've never thought of how guilty Bianca must have felt. I only got through everything in one piece by telling myself a story of how I had saved Bianca and she was fine. But of course she must have felt like garbage. I get that, I say aloud. I know it wasn't easy for you either, but it's not the same thing. You don't know. There's no way you could know. You weren't there. You can't understand what I went through after the police took me. But there were some good parts of what happened to you too. And I was the one who had to live with, Bianca must be able to see the scream building inside me because she catches herself. Okay, you're right. Okay, I can't even imagine what you went through. She puts her arms around me, covering my face with her billowing shoulders. I keep thinking how brave you must be to have survived everything and then still save all of us. I look into a neon puddle. I don't know if I survived or not. I feel like a part of me never came back from the night. Like, I'm here, but I'm also still there too. Like, the memory won't let you go. Like, the past becomes an optical illusion. Bianca takes a deep breath, not letting go of my neck. I think all you can do is not blame yourself for how you feel and take care of yourself, okay? And I promise I won't talk about your real-life trauma in front of other people. That topic is off limits from now on. Bianca lets go of me, and I take a long look at her in her crimson satin, turned strange colors by the reflected sign from a nearby nightclub. I nod, slowly, and I clasp her hand with mine, as if to say that we are bound together by more than just the past. Thank you. So, any questions? Yeah? Or we can do a sing-along. One of the other questions, sing-along.
I have a question. What are you working on next? Or can you not talk about it yet?
I can talk about it. I have a young adult trilogy that I sold to Tor, which I'm working with Miriam, the genius, amazing Miriam Weinberg on. And I handed in the first book a while ago, and I'm now revising that, and I'm about halfway through the second book, so fingers crossed. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. It's very different from this. It's swashbuckling, space, action, adventure kind of with feels. Yeah. Oh, you had your hand up. Hi, with the awesome hair.
Oh, your hair is red.
Is this a standalone book or part of a series?
It is a standalone book. I always caution that, maybe one day, 10 years from now, I'll be like, oh, I have an idea for a follow-up. But for now, it's a standalone. It's intended to wrap up and, be self-contained.
Thanks.
Yay. Dennis, hey.
Yeah, let's hope it's not a standalone book. Anyway, so I read a preview copy. So I have a question about the language, the linguistics, because there was a lot of things going on with the linguistics, especially with the Shiafanti. Could you describe some of your ideas or research around that?
Yeah, I mean, I hang out with language geeks a lot. I obsess about languages a lot. I have some friends who are some super hardcore semantics geeks, but I mostly just kind of screwed around and made stuff up. I don't know. Basically, in this world, it takes place in the medium far future. It takes place, I think, in the 33rd century. Humans left Earth in the 25th century, I think, and went and colonized this other planet. They've been living there for about 500 years, and there's a common language that everybody who came from Earth was speaking called Nuolang, which we don't really learn that much about, but I kind of imagine it being a constructed language that was supposed to be almost like Esperanto or one of those other constructed languages like Lojban or whatever. And but the languages are very much a product of the choices that people made about how to structure society, among other things. And so you have these two human cities on this planet, which, by the way, it's a tidally locked planet. So when I talk about there being the night, there's the night side of the planet, which is permanent darkness. And that's where Sophie goes, where she meets the crocodile, who she makes friends with. And So they're living on this other planet, and there's these two different human cities which have very, very, very different approaches to structuring their society and surviving on this planet. One of them is much more regimented and much more kind of much more conformist in a lot of ways, because they've decided that's how we're going to all stick together and we're all going to survive this and deal with the fact that the sky never changes, the sun never rises, the sun never sets, and so we need to have like rigid schedules. We need to like make sure that everybody knows what they're doing at every given moment, and that leads to a very conformist society. And the language has a lot of stuff embedded in it that I sort of came up with that helps to enforce that, because I think that's what happens when you have a really regimented conformist society, is that you end up with a lot of stuff embedded in the language that kind of lets you know indirectly about people's roles and what they're supposed to be doing and who they are and all that stuff. And then the other city, you know, started out with the same language, but because they kind of rebelled and decided to kind of let it all hang out and do whatever they felt like and sleep when they wanted and work when they wanted and basically live in a quote unquote state of nature, their language is much looser, but also has a lot of stuff that's kind of unsaid, and you have to kind of read between the lines. So, and there's a lot of stuff about Sophie, the main character, coming from the very regimented city and having to learn the language in the other city and getting super, super, super freaking confused by it. So it's just one of the things I kind of tried to shore up the world building with, I guess. Ooh, nice breeze. Yay. Awesome. Hi.
Hi.
Katie.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
On this coast.
Yay.
So I was wondering if it's possible to talk about it. I don't know if there are spoilers involved, but what kind of brain seed you had for this story? Like, was the tidally locked part of that? Or was it the story between these two humans at the party? Or were the crocodiles? Like, where did it all start? And also, do you have like a favorite world that you've built?
Oh, wow. So it definitely started, I kind of wrote a thing about this on John Scalzi's blog today, which is awesome. I'm super grateful to him for letting me do that. So it started with the tidally locked planet. That was kind of where the story came from. I was working at IO9. We were running a lot of science articles on that site. Like, we used to run like half science fiction, which was something that I always loved. And, you know, we're in the last like 5-10 years, we've been starting to really discover a lot more about planets outside our solar system. And what we've discovered is, I'm going to try to boil this down to, because I'm not an astrophysicist, and also I don't want to go on and on, but basically most of the planets out there that are in the habitable range of their suns, and, you know, that are kind of have a habitable temperature for humans, are tidally locked. Basically, I think like roughly maybe 3/4 of the stars in our galaxy are red dwarfs. And in order to be close enough to one of those stars to be warm enough for humans to be able to live, it's going to be pulled into the star's gravity, and it's going to become tidally locked. One side is going to be always facing that star. And so I sort of just got obsessed with thinking about, okay, if we ever did manage to leave this solar system and go colonize another planet, it would almost certainly, it would probably be tidally locked. That's like, if in the unlikely event, you know, we can talk about that, but in the unlikely event that we actually manage to get outside the solar system and colonize, we're going to be living on a planet like that. So it's just ended up just, I mean, talking to a ton of people, but also just trying to imagine what would that be like. And, you know, one thing that this book has in common with All the Birds in the Sky is that it's about people who are caught between two different extremes. In All the Birds in the Sky, it kind of started with science and magic, and what's it like when science meets magic, kind of. And that was my seed for that book. With this book, it was really day and night. And if there's like a permanent day that's like super bright and boiling hot and everything, and a permanent night that's really cold and like all just permanently dark, you know, that just kind of sparked my imagination. And then I had this idea of like, well, what if there's creatures living there in the dark and we can't understand them and they can't understand us? They can't come to our habitat. We can't go to their habitat. And that was kind of where it started. And it actually took like, it took a long, long, long time for that to turn into a story, to be honest. Like the first 1.5, 2 years I was working on this, I had a bunch of fragments and a bunch of stuff, but I didn't have any characters that I was really excited about. And I had a bunch of stuff happening, but I didn't have a story. And then it was only like after I quit IO9 and had some time to really focus on it that I came up with the characters of Sophie and Bianca as they are in the book now. And then it kind of started to fall into place. And then, you know, the character of Mouth, who's the other kind of POV character, came later. So it was definitely unusually, like normally I kind of start with the characters and then build the world around them. But with this, it was the world, and then I kind of built the characters into it. As far as my favorite world, I mean, maybe still it's, to the extent that it's not our world, maybe still the world of All the Birds in the Sky, because there's a lot of stuff in All the Birds in the Sky that I still kind of love kind of thinking about and exploring and would love to get back to at some point. Cool, thank you. Yay.
Hello.
Hi.
Why is this book filled with nothing but flawed, nuanced characters? Protagonists are supposed to be paragons for children to follow. I read your article on IO9 this morning. Please come back.
Oh my God, thank you, wow. That's a really good question. They're not flawed, they're perfect. What are you talking about? Name a flaw, come on. They're ideal human beings. They are the ideals to which we should all inspire. No, I don't know. I wrote a piece for my old Stomping Ground IO9 yesterday about basically how I love flawed women characters and how like going back to like Clarissa and like Doris Lessing, who's like one of my great inspirations, and like Vanity Fair and all that kind of stuff. I love that. And like this book in particular, I mean, that relationship between Sophie and Bianca is one of the most kind of thorny, kind of complicated, thorny, I would say, and ultimately kind of difficult relationships I've ever written. And I really wanted to try doing something like that. And, in particular with this book, I'm just going to kind of use that as a jumping off point and just say that in this book in particular, I was really trying to write kind of characters that I hadn't written before, because I didn't want to like just write the same handful of characters over and over again, which is a real failure mode, I think, if you're writing a lot of books. And so like the character of Sophie is really different from any protagonist I've written before. She's, as you kind of might have gleaned from the excerpts I read, she's very painfully shy. She doesn't really talk to strangers. She's, kind of introverted. She kind of processes stuff in her own head a lot. And there's never going to be a scene in this book where she sort of stands up and gives a speech and everybody's like, yeah, follow her. Like that's not who she is. She drives the story. She's still kind of the protagonist, and her choices are what make the story happen. But she's not like this sort of standard kind of Katniss Everdeen kind of, up front, like action hero character. And that was kind of like by design. And like similarly, the character of Bianca, I had a lot of fun writing, and there's a lot of kind of Vanity Fair kind of stuff in there. She's a little bit self-centered. Okay, she's a lot self-centered. She kind of knows that she has a lot of privilege, but she kind of also doesn't know it. And she can be kind of a jerk. And like the character of Mouth is this kind of, Mouth is a little bit of your kind of like badass smuggler who fights and, has killed more people than she's kept count of, but she's also incredibly neurotic and kind of obsesses about stuff and kind of like has this internal monologue where she's just constantly like just being neurotic about everything and has a lot of guilt and grief and stuff that she hasn't processed at all. And so I was trying to create characters that I had not written before and give them relationships that were not smooth. And like, I like kind of challenging your expectations of how relationships in a book like this are going to go, because there's a certain like format that maybe All the Birds in the Sky played around with a little bit, but still kind of adhered to, where you kind of know where the characters are going to end up in their relationship by the end. And here it's perhaps a little bit more unpredictable. I don't know. So I was trying to kind of screw around with that because I don't want to like get in a groove and just do the same thing. Thank you. Hey.
Hi. Do you know who's, I imagine there's probably like an audiobook version coming out. Since you're reading here, will you read it yourself? And how was it having LeVar Burton read one of your short stories?
Oh, God. So there is an audiobook. It's out now. I can't remember the names of the two women who are reading it, but it's two different people, which is awesome because there's two narrators in the book, and I'm just super excited that they got two different narrators for the audiobook. I think that's amazing. And because it's two different first person narrators, so that's really, really good. Or no, it's not. It's one first person, one third person. Anyway, but I can't remember their names. They're both people who've done a lot of audiobooks before, and I'm sure it's awesome. I haven't listened to it yet. The LeVar Burton thing, God, that was so freaking weird. Like, right up until the moment it happened, I was convinced that they were gonna be like, oh yeah, we realized that this was a terrible mistake and we found someone else. And like, we're gonna read someone else's story or whatever. Because for a couple of years before that, I'd be like, oh my God, if LeVar Burton would just read one of my stories on his podcast, I could finally die happy. And then it wasn't just reading, he did it in public with me there and like interviewed me. And it was like, what the hell? And like LeVar Burton sitting like 3 feet away from me, looking right at me and calling me delicious. Like, seriously. No, seriously, you can hear it. It's on there. Like, and I made them send me the unedited audio when it first happened because I was like, in case they cut out the part where he calls me delicious, I want to just have that for when I'm feeling really depressed and like I'm wasting my life. I can just hit play that and be like, okay, I must have done something okay at some point because God, that was so freaking weird. And like, sitting there in the audience listening to him read it, all I could do was sit there and think like of the flaws in that story and how it wasn't good enough for LeVar Burton to be reading and being like, oh God, no, that should have been better. That part should have been better. It's for LeVar. I should have done a better job for LeVar. Oh my God. But he was the nicest person. He was incredibly nice. And his wife, whose name I'm blanking on, is a makeup artist who worked on every single season of The Facts of Life. And so the fact that story was about the facts of life, he didn't tell her in advance. And she was just like, and she was lovely. And I met his granddaughter and we were all hanging out. It was so awesome. And he was just so sweet. He was so calming and reassuring and friendly, even though I was like freaking out. So yeah, it was amazing. And like, I kind of forget that it happened because it doesn't feel like something that would have actually happened. So I'm just like every now and then like, oh, that did happen. Dang. Yeah.
I have a question where you talked about the alternating chapters of Sophie and Mouth, and that Sophie's are in first person and Mouth's are in third person. And I wondered about why you adopted that strategy. And you say toward the end that Mouth has never been given a name. And so I wondered if that had something to do with it.
Yeah, okay, so that's my mom, by the way. My mom raises a good question. So basically, there's like two answers to like the alternating first person, third person thing. One is that it's a really easy way to differentiate those sections and to kind of make them stand apart. And I've read a lot of YA books that do that lately. I think a lot of YA does a lot, like I guess before young adult fiction came along and started doing that, people used to be like, oh, you can't alternate third person and first person. You can't present and past tense or whatever. And like YA has just kicked over all of those stupid baskets of rules that people had left lying around. So it's one of the billion reasons I'm grateful to YA. But it's an easy way to differentiate them. The third person, I mean, I think when I started out, it was that Sophie's experiences feel really kind of really immediate and really like they're happening to me right now. This is me and I'm going through this. It's like you're right there with her. And the Mouth chapters are kind of more pulpy almost, especially the early Mouth chapters where it's a lot of smugglers fighting pirates and like it's very kind of like, you know, almost Raymond Chandler-y, or I don't know. It's more kind of pulpy and noir-y almost. So that was part of it. But then as you go along, I think that part of it is that Sophie is more aware of her own feelings than Mouth. And Mouth is somebody who basically, despite this neurotic internal monologue that I mentioned, Mouth is somebody who is barely aware of her own feelings at any given time. And there's a bunch of parts in the book where Mouth doesn't even kind of realize that she's reacting in a particular way until somebody kind of points it out to her. She's kind of super unconscious of anything that's like right below the surface of her own feelings because she's gotten so good at putting up a front and kind of she's gotten really disconnected. And, you know, I kind of actually working on this and working on the YA, I kind of developed a theory about POV, which I'm going to share with you because you can't leave, or you can, but you're a captive audience. My theory about POV is that first person, like I have a hierarchy of what's the most immediate. First person present tense is the most immediate, I think, followed by third person, either present or past tense. And then first person past tense is actually less immediate than third person, because first person past tense is I'm telling you about a thing that happened to me that I've obviously survived, A, but also B, I'm kind of sitting down and telling you a story about like, yeah, that time this happened. And like, there's that distance of like the raconteur or the storyteller telling you about the thing that they did or that they experienced, versus like third person past tense can be super, super immediate. Like there was a gun pointed at his head. He didn't know what to do, versus like there was a gun pointing at my head. I didn't know what to do. Like, but obviously I figured it out, you know? You know, so like I experimented a lot with POV in this and the YA, and the YA is all first person present tense right now because of that immediacy, because of the like, this is happening to me right now. But first person past tense, I think, is like the most distanced. And then second person, I don't even want to think about. Cool. Yay. Somebody had their hand up in the back, I think.
Got time for a couple more questions?
Or sing along.
Hi. So is there any lesson that you took from writing All of the Birds in the Sky that you really helped you writing this book? And also, is there any lesson that you took from this book that you are using going forward with the YA series and whatever you're working on?
Wow, I wish there was a lesson I had learned from All the Birds in the Sky. That would be awesome. I mean, the main thing about this book, writing this book after All the Birds in the Sky, is that I had a powerful sense of not wanting to do even more of the birds in the sky or whatever. I didn't want to do All the Birds in the Sky too. Partly because when I started writing this book, I had just sold All the Birds in the Sky to Tor, and part of me was convinced that everybody was going to hate All the Birds in the Sky, and so I better have a backup plan, and I better have something really different to roll out next, so that I could be like, but wait, I've got something else. But also, I wanted to kind of stretch my muscles and do something really different, and I think with All the Birds in the Sky, actually, okay, I did learn a lesson from All the Birds in the Sky, and it was a lesson that I really got from Miriam, who is like a genius, because there were some parts in All the Birds in the Sky which were like really important emotional scenes where I had kind of cheated on the emotion and I kind of swept things under the rug, and there was like, it wasn't there on the page. It was kind of in the scene, but you couldn't feel it from the characters. And I felt like All the Birds in the Sky was where I really finally realized that I was using humor a lot to kind of compensate for my real shortcomings in writing emotion and character and real internal struggle. And so this book, I kind of took from that. I'm going to just try to dial the humor way back so that I can really focus on the emotion and really get to that without Miriam having to kick my ass. And it's got some funny bits. There's like a whole page of poop jokes at one point. So, but you know, that was kind of how I reacted to All the Birds in the Sky. And then with this book, I think I mentioned that I had 2 years of basically stumbling around, not being able to find the story and the characters. And I was writing it all longhand in journals. And that I kind of stopped doing that because I feel like it's too easy to just get lost. And maybe I'll go back to it at some point, but I kind of felt like I needed to start writing on a computer so that, again, like the first draft, so that I could kind of look back and see where I'm going and try to like plan it out a little bit more. So we'll see how that goes. I don't think I ever learned lessons. I think I just try to do the opposite of whatever I did last time, basically. So the YA is super funny again. Like this one is like no humor or less humor, and then the YA is just as funny as I can possibly make it. So I don't know.
Let's be
somebody right here in front of the pillar.
This is the
Blue
last
jacket.
2 questions.
Yay.
It's interesting to hear about the long journal writing and switching to a computer. Is there other interesting things you can share about your process, things that you might have changed along the way to help you stay disciplined or become creative? Do you avoid coffee, use substances? Do you find writing in the morning or different patterns? I'm interested as a writer and curious to know.
Yeah, I mean, the process is always different for every book, and it's always like changing over time. You know, I used to love like having there was a lot of frustrating stuff about having the day job, having IO9, where I would basically get up in the morning, work on IO9 until, you know, the late afternoon, early evening, go sit in a cafe, write my novel, and then go home and work on IO9 for another hour or 2 until I collapsed. And that was my day, and it was awesome. It was super structured. And Oops, sorry. I kind of miss that structure. I miss having that kind of like, knowing exactly what every part of the day is supposed to be. Now it's just, I try to write as much as I can, and I still take a really long walk to like some kind of nice cafe, preferably one where I don't run into people I know. And I drink, a lot of coffee, although not as much as I used to. I cut back my coffee, honestly, since a certain thing happened in like 2016 that made the world more anxiety full, but that I won't mention. But I still drink a lot of coffee, and I just kind of try to keep my head down and stay off social media. Like I have like Twitter and Facebook blocked on my laptop. Like they won't load because I'm just like, no social media. Yeah, it's mostly like taking a really long walk, clearing my head, talking to myself way too much. I don't know. That's basically it, I guess. Thank you. You're welcome. And then Marty. Hi. Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
So read the book. It's fantastic.
Oh,
and I'm seeing a lot of reviewers, and I was feeling the same way as well, that a lot of reviewers are positioning this as in dialogue with Le Guin and a successor of Le Guin's work in science fiction, especially. So the question here is really, I don't know if that was something you set out to do with this particular novel, but how do you feel? Is that something that you are delighted with and want to keep pursuing? Is that, I assume the feelings are positive, but in that particular way, as a successor to Le Guin's works, what are your thoughts?
Oh my God. So this is, I don't know. Obviously it says on the front cover, this generation's Le Guin. And like what I keep saying to people the last couple of days is, this generation's Le Guin is named Le Guin. And next generation's Le Guin is named Le Guin. And like the generation after that, the Le Guin is going to be, and like she's still here. Nobody can possibly like hold a candle to her. Or I've actually just been rereading or in some cases reading for the first time, all of the Hainish stories and novels, because there's that beautiful 2-volume set that they put out. Also, I was asked to do a thing that relates to Le Guin, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about yet, but I definitely was, when I started writing this book, I definitely was thinking about Le Guin and Butler and, some of the other kind of like science fiction that shaped me when I was coming up, like the kind of like deep questions about humanity and society that the classic science fiction of my youth kind of asked. And I definitely wanted to write that kind of book. And I think I did. They always say steal from the best. And I definitely stole from some of my favorite writers, like super liberally, including Doris Lessing, who nobody talks about as much as they should, but also Le Guin and Butler and, Vonnegut and Delaney and everybody. But I'm very, very comfortable with acknowledging my debt to Le Guin. I owe her a debt that I can never repay. I'm very uncomfortable with people calling me a successor or the new whatever, the new Le Guin or whatever. I'm very uncomfortable with that, even though when Andrew Sean Greer very kindly gave us that blurb, I was mostly just like, thank God we got a blurb and it's positive and that's awesome. But, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that makes me really uncomfortable. And I feel like, Gary Wolfe said I've been going through all my back issues of Locus, and there's one where Gary Wolfe says, anybody who invites comparison to Le Guin loses, which I think is fair. And the more I reread her, the more I'm just blown away by her immense talent and the monumental scale of her world building and her insights into human nature. And I would be happy just to kind of like be a tiny speck in her shadow, but I happily acknowledge my debt to her, is what I would say.